I'm really interested in music and culture, and those components of Montessori education, and even beyond. Before I even knew anything about Montessori, that was what grabbed me into my love of learning, which I continue to this day. And as I was brought into this Montessori family some years ago, sharing my love of musical instruments and culture, I started learning more about Montessori, and I'm like, man, I wish I had had that in my childhood. So it got me excited to start to follow some of the leads of people that have taught me the little I know, and then the more I talk to people, they refer me to folks like yourself that were in this educational realm long before them even. So I was hoping.
Where did you first come across it?
Good question. I had been teaching capoeira, which is an Afro-Brazilian martial art, and I found that the communities that were welcoming me had, I was teaching it in in the public sphere in the community, and a lot of the children that I was working with had some background in Montessori, and so over time I started getting connected with some of these families, and then a school, Sundrops Montessori, started. Actually, it was two. It was MMP, Montessori Mount Pleasant, and then the Vigliottis, and then Sundrops Montessori. Both of them welcomed me and started, guiding me to have some foundation. And
so this is your home. You're come from Charleston?
From Virginia, but I came to
That's
Charleston.
Right, you're from Williamsburg.
From Williamsburg, yeah. Melissa loves that.
Oh my, they do. They go every opportunity they get.
Yeah, so I want to welcome her to meet my family there sometime.
I first went to Williamsburg, believe it or not, when I was a little kid. Well, not a little kid, but some friends of my father who had a daughter, named the daughter Rosemary, and years later when they wanted to travel, they asked me to go with them so that if they went out at night, there'd be somebody to stay with their Rosemary, who was about 4 or 5 years old at the time. And they were going to Williamsburg, and that was the summer of 1950.
Wow, how about that?
Yeah.
Man, what was that like for you? Tell me.
It was wonderful because it was, Williamsburg at that time had gotten off the ground, but it wasn't what it is today. It was much more an old village. There weren't, restaurants with specific ways of approaching this cooking, or like Walter, what's his name? They didn't have that at the time. But you ate in the restaurants, but they were strictly the menu was cooked in the way it had been cooked 200 years before, and things like that. It was very interesting, and they didn't have the capacity for the numbers of visitors that they have today. There were far fewer. The palace had not been rebuilt, and many of the places, like when you walked behind one big street, there would be regular houses where people were living and carrying on at the same time. That was all within the Williamsburg Foundation area.
Sure.
But they were people who had been there, for 40 years or so. And they were telling us, how the Williamsburg Foundation was trying to make sure that the houses would be kept in the area and follow the building plans for them. So it was, and I went back 60 years later, 1990. With my daughter, and my niece was there, and it was for Thanksgiving, and it was really nostalgic. It had really changed. The only thing that I felt had been unchanged and was just like it had been before was Newton Parish Church.
Sure enough.
Right there, and exactly as it had been in 1950 or in 17, whenever.
My grandparents are buried there. So
in the churchyard there.
Yep, right there, and that's always been a special. My mom would love to talk to you. I realize as I'm sitting here listening to you, she's so much of the reason. Both my parents love history and Williamsburg, and so much of what their conversation is about these types of things, old Williamsburg, and how some has stayed the same and some has changed.
Yeah. Well, they didn't have the big hotels, and in order to get, because the lady that I was with the lady was very sensitive to the heat,
Mm.
and we had to have an air conditioned bedroom at night. So I think we were about 8 miles outside the town in a motel because she needed the air conditioning. But then we went into the town during
How
the
about
day.
that?
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
yeah,
Thanks for
yeah.
sharing that.
Well, it was pleasant. It really impressed me. I really did enjoy it.
Great.
Mhm.
Thank you. Well, I wanted to, and feel free if you need to if, take a break or anything, but I wanted to really get everything I could in the little time we have about your experience with Montessori, and also, stepping back at this phase and having watched it for so long, different observations you've made. So, if you don't mind, I'll just start firing with some questions
Sure.
for you. So, I
Fire
was
away.
wondering, I wanted to start by asking you to recall some of your childhood and formative education experiences. First of all, where you were raised and schooled, and also what was the general attitude toward children and children's education in the early years of your life?
Well, I'm from New Jersey. I was born in New York, but my mother lived in New York, and my father's people were in New Jersey, so we went back and forth. Um, my early education, all through my education, was with the Catholic Church.
Mm.
A Catholic school from uh, the time I first went to school until I graduated from high school, and then I went to a Catholic college in Massachusetts, Our Lady of the Elms, and I did some work at Seton Hall, and then I did my Montessori education later in time. But I was very, I had a very rather rigid um, education, but it was a very thorough one. I look on it now and I realize that, my gosh, we were taught so much more than that is getting across today.
Mm.
It's just, and none of the teachers that I had, either in grammar school or high school or even in college, ever imposed their ideas on us.
Mm.
It was always a matter of this is where this comes from, and this is how he or she approaches it, and that would just be put out. It was up to us to believe it or to want more of it or whatever. But I was very well educated. That particular time in the 50s, when 40s and 50s, we didn't have the tremendous uh, pressure to conform to political correctness that is occurring today.
Mm.
We didn't have that.
Mm.
We were encouraged to think for ourselves, and I think that was. I think that proved itself because that generation were very we were the ones that almost all of us went on for higher education.
Mm.
At least at that point, people who graduated in the 30s, they didn't,
Mm.
they couldn't afford to go to college,
Sure.
most of them. But in the 50s, we could and did, and it was of great advantage to not only learn church history, but also we were taught Latin,
Mm.
and the that gave us a very good beginning, a very good basis for languages.
Mm.
It was much easier for me to learn languages than it was for my husband because I had been exposed to another language when I was very young,
Mm.
and therefore it came much more easily,
Mm.
especially the language of Latin.
Mm.
Because when we were in Italy, believe me, Bergamo had nobody, nobody within meters, kilometers, that could really speak English. There was one lady in the town, in the little town.
Wow.
Her name was Kay. I forget her last name. But she would help the people who were coming into the course find apartments and things, and we would, pay her to do that.
Mm.
She was great with that. She was from London. She had married an Italian, and they lived in Bergamo. So she had gotten in touch with the office. The office did not give her much let's see, they didn't credit her with much.
Mm.
They couldn't do it, but they wouldn't let her do it
Mm.
by the office of the Montessori office. But she did it. We got the names around, and tell people where to go and how to get in touch with Kay.
Wow.
So that was great. And then, of course, I went to a Catholic college, and again, we had a very full curriculum. There was very little study time allotted to us. We worked all the time.
Mm.
It's not done that way today,
Yeah.
but it was at that time. But I was always a great reader.
Mm-hmm.
I'm asthmatic, so I spent a lot of my time as a child in bed or,
Mm-hmm.
not able to go out because running around, started the asthma again.
Wow.
So I did learn to read at a very early age, and I read everything I could get my hands on. So, the process of learning came to me very naturally.
Mm-hmm.
Very naturally, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And my favorite field is history.
Yeah.
It has always been, yeah.
And one of mine too.
Yeah.
And so, when did the intersection with Montessori come?
I had been spent the summer in New York, actually New York and New Jersey and Philadelphia. I had meningitis,
Mm-hmm.
and I had to take the children home to my mother to help me with them because I was trying to get over it, when you're so limited
Mm-hmm.
when you're getting over that
Mm-hmm.
disease. And it had not been diagnosed early, and so I had a lot of scar tissue and a lot of problems with it. So I was in the north for that whole summer, and then I came back to. We lived in Coral Gables on Madrid Street, and I came back, and there was an advertisement in the newspaper for a reading teacher at the Assumption Academy on Brickell Avenue. So I decided, well, I'll give it a try. And I went down and I talked with the woman who had put the advertisement in, and all she wanted was a reading teacher for the first graders, which was fun. I had been teaching at the boy choir school in Princeton, and so I was used to kids that age, third grade or so. And she took me over to the building where they had going to start the elementary, and I noticed that there was a classroom set up, and she said, "Yes, this is a Montessori classroom." She didn't seem particularly interested in it. She introduced me to Mother Beatrice, who was the Montessori teacher at the time. It was a beautiful building, right on the slopes of Biscayne Bay,
Mm-hmm.
and all that land was there for the kids to run, and it was really the perfect spot. And so she said that just she needed someone to work with the children on their language from like 8 to 12 and then go home. And they would be in the Montessori in the afternoon. So that was fine. And I had two young children. Melissa was not yet 3, and my son was 5. And I thought, well, the perfect thing for me would be to bring them with me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I asked Mother Beatrice, God bless her, Mother Beatrice Rose Mala, to show me some of these things, explain it. And of course, once it's explained, it was just like a revelation. Mm-hmm. Of course, this is the way the human mind works. Of course, this is the way to teach math. Mm-hmm. Of course, this is how it should be done. And so I put the children in the Montessori for the mornings, and then I was taking them home at noon. And the other teacher with Mother Beatrice Rose was Joan Parisi, and Joan had just finished her training in Washington and had came down to work in Florida because her mother and sisters were there down around Homestead, which is further south of Miami.
Yeah.
And so Joan was working with Mother, but the head of school, the head of the elementary school, the nun that had interviewed me, and Joan did not get along very well. And the head of school was really not at all interested in Montessori. She told me once, it's for the birds. And so Joan decided to leave at Christmas time. And the head of the whole school, Mother Claire Teresa, asked me if I would work with Mother B and stay the whole day, and they wouldn't charge me tuition for the children, which was nice. That was $1,600. It was very nice.
Wow.
So I did, and the more I worked with Mother B, who I loved, the more I saw of how the children responded and of the way they did things. I was in teaching the first graders who were not Montessori children language, and I was working with, naturally, an introductory reader. And right through the window where I could see was a patio, and there were little chairs out there, And there the Montessori children were curled up in the chairs with books in their hands. Now, they're younger than the ones I have, and the 5-year-olds are out there reading books. And in here, I'm struggling to teach 6-year-olds, many of whom their native language was Spanish, and I was teaching them in English, which is much harder to deal with than Spanish is, because Spanish has a single symbol and a sound that go together. English isn't like that. There's a symbol for some sounds, and then there are several others that can also make that sound. It's very complicated to teach a child to read in English. Anyway, they were doing just fine. And here, this gang was not doing as well. There were 2 or 3 of them that really struggled. So when I would take them in the afternoon to the Montessori classroom, it was easy to concentrate on what I wanted them to do and so forth, teaching them how to write and so forth. And I realized at that time, through that year, this is how children should be taught. This is how the human mind works. And this is how it should be. So that about, I guess 2 or 3 months into it, Mother Claire Teresa said if I could get to Pennsylvania, they would pay my tuition and I could study with Mother Isabel Eugenie. So my mother was living in Philadelphia at the time. I said, oh yeah, I can get to Philadelphia. And I remember so well, I had heard about her, of course. And I got there that morning. I got everybody organized and arranged, and I got a babysitter for the children. And this little figure came up the stairs and into the room where we were gathered. There were only 5 of us there. And we were all going to teach in Assumption academies. So Mother Isabel herself was going to train us. And this little figure came in. She had a great big handkerchief in front of her face for a minute. She was blowing her nose as she came up the stairs. And then she had this wonderful way about her. She said, well, darling, clapped her hands. We all sat down. And she started her course. And it was almost unbelievable. It was like somebody opened a door in the world that I had never realized was locked. She knew so much, and she was so careful to point out specific little details of things, Why do the children hold the color tablets this way? Well, because at one time, colored tablets were silk thread. And if the children touched them, they were going to wear the thread away. And, silk thread is very fragile. So they held them this way. And after they noticed that this was good for the children, it strengthened the muscles in their hands. So little things like that. See, that's the genius of Montessori. You watch a child and you see that this happens if this is done. And you try it out, and if it works out, that's how you do it. And she was the antithesis of rigid. She was, at that time, I think she was 75 years old, 76 years old. But she had such a marvelous mind. Oh, my goodness, she had a marvelous mind. And it was such a delight, to work with her. Such a delight. I would, if it had been 3 times as hard work, I would still have done it because I was so appreciative. Everything she said, every step she took, everything she could show us just made me more and more aware of the great idea of Montessori. She had been trained by Maria and finished in 1921.
Wow.
Yeah. She was really something. And at that time, she was cooperating with Penn State because they wanted to have a Montessori training course in the college. However, when push came to shove, they wanted too much. They wanted to influence it too much with the American modern thing, and she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't bend that way. It would either be done right, or she wasn't going to do it.
Wow.
And that was, it was a great step. And I went back to Assumption Academy and taught that next year, and it was just exciting to teach this, to watch the children, because it's not uncommon for you to say at the end of a year, well, when they started out, they could do this, and now they can do that.
Yeah.
But with Montessori, you could see that in a matter of weeks,
Mm.
and it was so engaging. And people always say, how do you give attention to every child? Well, that's the way the classroom is set up.
Mm.
That's what you do. You do with the one that you start with here, and the others who are coming after will come and stand and wait for you, and you work it out that way.
Mm.
That is a hard thing to learn if you're not used to it,
Mm.
but it's the only way to teach.
Yeah.
You're too different to be taught all in gangs or groups like we are.
Yeah.
And then to have marks,
Mm.
86,
Mm.
93. What does 86 mean? That you could learn.
Yeah.
Can you learn if you even to go 86th part of the way home, or pay 86th part of a bill,
Mm.
or 90% of shoe sizes that fit? I mean, it's illogical,
Mm.
and we should have stopped it a long time ago.
Yeah. That's very, very interesting. I never looked at it like that. It's something came up as you were telling that. So was your formative higher education in standard and regular education? Wow. So you were able to juxtapose that with your Montessori.
Yeah.
What were some of the other things that you found with that, this discrepancy between the two learning styles, and how the children were developing in a...
Well, you saw the difference in the children so quickly,
Mm.
which in a traditional setting you don't.
Yeah.
You don't see much of a change in them. With you have a class of 22 or 23 children, you can't. If you stop and give it some thought, you have 23 children in front of you. If they are alert and aware, they're well nourished, they're well dressed. They're American kids. They have all the advantages.
Mm.
But there is no way that you can say that 2 of the 23 are exactly alike and learn exactly the same and will react exactly the same way,
Yeah.
because children are individuals just like all of us. So the idea that all 23 should be doing the same thing at the same time is illogical,
Mm.
very illogical.
Yeah.
And the first thing that I think people are surprised about is the noise level in a Montessori classroom. If the teacher has, enough experience and the classroom's running pretty well, you'll always have some noise.
Mm.
But you never go into an office of anything and expect them to be absolutely silent.
True.
People in the office will do this and they'll talk about it, and they'll do that and they'll talk about it. The exchange of language between peoples is important.
Mm.
Why is it so hard for people to grasp that a class of 23 children are 23 individuals?
Mm. Yeah.
And this idea of a mark, well, every teacher has a slightly different idea of what marks should be and what they should show, and
Yeah.
The mark goes with the child, but the basis on which the mark is made does not go with the child.
Mm.
So we tell ourselves that 90 is a good mark, but you can't pay, like I say, you can't go 90% of the way home.
Mm.
You can't do 90% of what
Yeah.
you should do. You've got to do it all. And that's the great advantage to Montessori children. They understand that you've got to do it all.
Mm.
They do it and they're finished with it, and they put it away. They put it away.
Yeah.
They also finish what they start.
Mm.
That's one of the most important things. And I have been always so impressed with the fact, with my children, when they were growing up, they finished what they started.
Mm.
Not only in the classroom, but in their lives. They finish what they start.
Mm.
And, I've been around other people whose children were not Montessori trained, and the parent was always saying, put that back, put this back. You never have to do that with a Montessori child. They know to put it back.
Yeah.
They don't leave it out.
Mm.
And that's the way you should look at the world.
Mm.
You're going to start something, you're going to finish it.
Yeah.
If not, don't start it. And very often the work that a child will, for instance, they start, we'll say a 3-year-old with a map, 4-year-old with a map of Africa. And they get started, and it's going to take them a while to put it away because they have to finish it and then put it away. And they understand that. And they'll ask, will you help me? I don't know where this goes. Will you help me? I don't know where that goes. That's fine. It's okay to ask for help. Whereas in the traditional classroom, when I was growing up, if you asked for help, oh my goodness, who were you to ask for help? Mother Isabel Eugenie, who was like an angel just put on earth. I mean, she had the most wonderful way of doing things and seeing things. And I said one afternoon, we were practicing, the 5 of us were practicing, and I said, gee, I bet the color tablets were beautiful, and they were in silk. And so when she came the next morning, she brought a box, and she opened it, and there it was, a silk thread. Oh, the colors were so beautiful. Oh, it was so beautiful. And she said they had been using the threads and so forth, but during the war, Chateau and Windus was bombed, and they didn't make materials anymore. So she couldn't get it. And then finally, Ninhus came up with the paint on the tablets. And it works, and it's fine, but it's nothing like the beautiful threads that they had. Oh, gosh, it was beautiful. And she also pointed out some mistakes that Ninhus made when he made the materials, like the bell cabinets. He didn't do it right. She said she had worked with them, and she got impatient with Albert Ninhus. So Mother Isabel was the angel on my shoulder, and I then went to work for Alexander. The nuns in that convent decided that they didn't want to continue with Montessori, and they didn't want the very young children anymore. So it became much more of a high school, and eventually they closed down, which was too bad because it was such a perfect spot, right on Biscayne Bay, right across the. Are you familiar with Miami?
Yeah, love it.
The bridge that goes from the downtown square, and then you came across and you're on Brickell Avenue, and the chapel is still there, but they've sold off the land and they put a high-rise up.
Wow.
Yeah.
How about that?
Yeah. So then I went to work for Alexander Montessori School, and they were not AMI, they were AMS. But there was a woman that was directing them and helping them named Elizabeth Kaspari, and she had been in India and was at Kodaikanal with Montessori and her son, and that's where she had been trained. So she was helping Beverly Alexander McGee, and Bev was looking for a teacher for her downstairs. They had just remodeled the whole building. It was beautiful. It had a tile floor and everything. So I didn't know really how much Montessori they were willing to absorb, because I thought maybe it was just one of these things they think the children will learn it more quickly and get better, quote, marks, unquote. But it wasn't that way at all. She really wanted the real thing, and it was obvious that she did. So I taught there at Red Road for 2 years, and then I'm trying to think what year it was. I think it was the beginning of my 3rd or 4th year. My husband and I had decided to take a trip to Europe. There was a very good flight that went from Nassau in the Bahamas to Luxembourg. It was really remarkable. And lots of people were taking it, so we decided to go and do it, and we did. We enjoyed it, but we figured, well, this is the trip to Europe, that's it, And we came back, and Beverly had hired a teacher from the Northeast. I think it was Massachusetts. It may have been Vermont, but someplace in New England. Nice woman, but she was going to work with them for a year, and they were going to see whether or not she was ready to go to Bergamo to get the training. And she wasn't. She could not. I've noticed that with many teachers. Once you get used to the traditional thing, to break out of it and, make it into a thing like Montessori is very, very hard. Very hard, and she couldn't do it. And my husband and I had taken the children to dinner. It was a Friday night, and we went to this old Chinese place where we used to go for some suppers. And there was, about 2 blocks down, there was a pet shop. And it used to leave the puppies in the window, so of course they had to go and see the puppies. And I was sitting in the car waiting for him to come back with them. And out of clear blue sky, something came into my mind and said, go to Bergamo. So I came home and I picked up the phone and I said, Beverly, I can go to Bergamo. She said, well, I can't think of anybody I'd rather see go to Bergamo. But I hadn't finished my degree yet. So they said, no, you probably are not going to be able to be accepted. So I called Mother Isabel. And she had told me when I was leaving her at the end of that course, I want you to continue your education. Now don't let this just go behind you. Make sure that you stay with it and finish it. So she, I don't know whether she had any influence on Grazzini, but he wrote and told me he would take me. But he warned me he didn't think I would be able to do it. No, I still have the letter.
Nice. Awesome.
And so that was in the end of May, beginning of June, I think. Well, we had to sell the house, we had to sell the car, we had to get this, we had to do that. My husband was an artist, and he worked for Aloe Cosmetics in Fort Lauderdale, so he was going back and forth every day. And I didn't even give it a thought, to be perfectly honest with you. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. It just had gotten this idea, go to Bergamo, and that was that. So I told him, whether you come or whether you don't come, I'm going to go to Bergamo. Well, he didn't like it. He was very mad about it at first. But then he decided, well, maybe I'll get a chance to do some artwork while I'm there. Well, of course, he did a great deal of artwork while he was there. But anyway, we got a boat that was leaving Miami and going to the Madeiras and then into the Med and into Barcelona and then ending up in Geneva.
Wow.
Yeah, so we took that boat and got into Bergamo, and I mean, I don't even remember that we had a map. It was as if something wind us up and put us on the road. We got there and we spent a night in a hotel, and then the next day we didn't like where we were staying, so we had put the luggage in we had a van, we had rented a van. So we put the luggage back in the van and we found a little pension not far from the center. And when we were sitting down to lunch, and then the children went out to play in the garden, and they came in and said there were people speaking English in the garden. So we went out and found that they were from the center. They were, going to study take the course. So they introduced us to Kay Albani, whom I was mentioning to you, and she found us in an apartment. So that, it just went together very well. And I met Linda Preston and a few other people who were there at the time, and they warned us, this is a very hard course. Nothing prepares you for this. Either you do it or you don't, but he will do nothing to help you. And he wouldn't. Grazzini was a mathematical genius. It was like somebody, again, teaching me something that was there, but I had never been taught properly. I never made the association of a symbol and a quantity. Because when you're young and you're taught a symbol and a sound, and then a symbol and a quantity, it's very confusing. You don't always get the idea, and I didn't. But by the time I left Bergamo, I knew math, and I loved it, and I realized it wasn't me. They tried to teach us without the quantity. You must associate the symbol and the quantity. Some children can do it very easily. Some others need, and I was one that needed a little more help with it till I understood it. But the course was taxing. We had to, we listened in Italian, and there was a translation, but it was very clumsy. By, a couple of months in, we realized you can't pay too much attention to what she was saying because her English was so limited. But as we picked up the language, we didn't need much, of her help. But we had to have our notes ready and submit it to the office every 6 weeks, so that they could be examined, and if you made a mistake, it could be checked. And so,
Wow.
so we wrote them, and then we typed them. We went we had to have the notes in at the first 6 weeks. We also had to have practice on the materials, and I had one advantage there. Even though I had not been in charge of a class, I knew the materials because, I had done the
Sure.
preschool class. So that was very good, and I didn't have any problem with that. We had two written exams. Oh boy, they were something. We could choose, we could take 3 strips of paper and turn them over and decide which of the 3 things we wanted to write about. And then we had to exhaust it, and exhaustion was the thing. We wrote from 9 to 5 straight for 3 solid days.
Whoa.
Over one topic. So you really knew that topic. You had to know the topic. And at that point, that was in December. December was it? I think the early December we had to have it, and that was the first one. And people started falling out.
Yeah.
And then Christmas time we had charts that we had to make, and we had to send them in. So that was Christmas. Oh boy, that was awful. And we had orals then. Let's see, we had written and practicum, and then oral exams. And then I did that again. And the oral exams that I did at the end, I remember very well, because it was we had to hand in our albums, and we did we could again take 3 in front of the people who were testing us, take one of those particular presentations and do it for them. And I remember at the end of it, I was so tired. It was a Sunday, and we had been at it. We didn't even stop for lunch. They let us drink while we were, for a few minutes, and if we had something real easy just to eat, we could eat. That was it. And Mario was very kind. He really was. He said to me, "Just calm down now and look out the window." It was botany, and what I was looking for was the little tendrils that hold ivy onto a wall and so forth, and that was what, as I looked out, it suddenly came to me. But he was very easy to work with. He was, when he tested you, he didn't stand there, and look threatening. Grazzini did. He stood and looked threatening.
Wow.
He was a handful, that man. I could never understand why he was so harsh to us. But he was harsh. I went back, I digress, I went back years later to ask if any of the teachers who were not, spoken for would be willing to come to Miami and work with us. And he said, yes, I could talk to them, I could talk to the class. And when we finished, he was very sweet, kissed my hand, and was very nice. But believe me, he wasn't nice. When he was a genius at what he was teaching.
Wow.
But his personal relations with people were just terrible.
And was he trained by Mario or Maria?
He was trained by Mario and Eleonora Honegger, who was trained by Maria too.
Wow.
But later than Mother Isabel. His abilities were remarkable. Yeah. He really was remarkable. He was extremely intelligent. So was his wife. They were a great couple. Mario was not hard to live with or work with or anything. He really did his job and did it very well. Camillo Grazzini was a man at war with the world. I don't know why, but he was. And he was very antagonistic toward the students, especially American students. Very antagonistic. That was the way it was.
How many people were in your cohort?
We started out at 42, and I think you could drop back to 6 to 9. you could drop back to audit where you didn't have to hand in your notes or anything because you wouldn't get a certificate.
Wow.
Or you could flunk out.
Mm.
And if you were really struggling to start with and you didn't do real well on your exams, there was no way you could make it up.
Wow.
You know, I think 19 of us finished with the full diploma.
Mm.
Then there were others who failed the exams, did well in the course but failed the exams,
Mm.
and they could come back and take the exams
Wow.
within the next 3 years. But how in the world would you ever be able to do that? Because when we did the exams, we were at the course day and night. The intensity was almost
Mm.
unbearable, and you couldn't do that again.
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
you just can't get to that point again. And you couldn't have anything else in your life. I mean, all you could do was try to get through
Mm.
the exams, get the materials that you had to have certified, get the charts certified. You know, we had the Tree of Life. We had to know all these
Mm.
things and have them ready. And you just, once you fell behind, you fell behind. You never could catch up.
Mm.
And that was hard to see.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
And just as those people would start to falter, he would really, really zone in on them and just pile it up
Mm.
and get rid of them.
Wow.
They'd leave.
Boot camp.
It was worse than boot camp.
Mm.
Yeah, there were some people there who had been in the service and said it was worse than that. It
Mm.
was, but I understand now, looking back at it, that this was probably necessary.
Mm.
If Montessori was going to continue and if it was going to spread, you had to have people who knew what they were doing, and he didn't want to put any half-wits out there.
Yeah,
you know.
yeah,
So
sure.
I can understand it. Yeah.
Wow.
I can, but it made a really tough. It was terrible to see these people start to falter, and he would just zone in on them, making them
Mm.
miserable, and there was nothing we could do. You couldn't help. All you could do was try to get through yourself. You just couldn't help anybody else. It was impossible,
Mm.
and it was
How
an
long
awful
was
thing
that
to see.
training? What was the duration?
It started in I think 9 months.
9
yeah,
months.
yeah.
Wow.
Because we went to July.
Mm.
We did the graduating in July.
Mm.
Yeah,
Mm.
and we had to be ready to go because the boat was going back
Wow.
the next day.
Wow.
So it was tight.
What year did you graduate your Montessori program?
71.
Oh, cool. Wow. I was hoping, as I said, my fascination generally in life is with music and culture, and
Uh-huh.
I wanted to ask your insight because that's a crucial facet of Montessori education, are those aspects, and I was hoping that you could just speak some on your experience with those two aspects, music and or culture. and
Well,
how
first
they-
of all, I think that, I have a great ear for music. I love music. And when I'm in the classroom, as the children come in the morning, I like to put a disc or a record or whatever, maybe a radio program, whatever, so that the children come to music. And early in the morning when they're bright and gay and everything and they can listen to the music, they like it.
Mm.
And sometimes if you have an older class, I would usually write the name of the musician and what was playing and so forth, so that they would recognize it. I remember they all loved the Sleigh Ride by
Mm.
Mozart, and I think that that's important in the classroom. And if I had my druthers, I'd see to it that every Montessori classroom had a Bose, because the sound is so good. You want the children to hear it and hear it well.
Mm.
And then the discs, today they're small, and we had bigger ones,
Yeah.
but the vinyl ones really were lovely. Even today when I listen, I'm surprised at how wonderful the sound is on a vinyl record.
Mm.
So I think that it's important, and it's important to just say to the children, you don't have to spoon feed them, this is Mozart, the Sleigh Ride. This is Mozart from Don Giovanni.
Mm.
This is, pictures at an exhibition from the Russians,
Mm.
And that, I think, is important for them, and I think that they should listen. And I think that it's wrong to say, oh, well, it's above their, music isn't above anybody's belief. You know, there's no level at which you can suddenly appreciate music. A 10-year-old doesn't do it more than a 5-year-old. Either you do it or you don't do it. But one of the other things about that is that a child who is not paying attention to the music and who doesn't seem to react to it probably has a hearing problem. I always notice that with them.
Interesting.
And there are some children who really do. I noticed that particularly with my mother. She never could hear music. And she didn't even realize that she was missing anything, you know.
Interesting.
So I think that music should be part of their lives. I don't think that they should have to learn music. They should have to learn to read it. But if they do, what's better than the bells and the charts on the bells? There's nothing much to that. Any child can learn to do that.
Yeah.
But watch for the child who doesn't go to it, child who doesn't seek it out. They don't hear it, so they don't enjoy it. And that very often means that they aren't hearing as well as they should be.
Makes sense.
I remember a little boy, and when I was in Malden, and he was a marvelous little kid, and he was in charge this particular week of putting the music on the record player. And all of a sudden, you know, he didn't seem to be playing it much, and I noticed he'd forget, you know, and finally I said to him, "Koyat, why didn't you get the disc on?" "Huh? The disc?" And, you know, there was something that was very strange. He had been with me for nearly 3 years. So I talked to his father and I said, "You know, I don't know, but maybe you should have his ears checked, because he doesn't seem to me to be listening much." And the kid had a very severe buildup of wax in one of his ears. He had almost no hearing in it.
Wow.
So they took care of it. So it's very good on that score too. And a child who always has trouble with it and never pays attention to it should have his hearing checked. And sometimes the simple tests don't show that, you know. But the ability to retain what you hear is important.
Yeah, sure.
So I think that's one thing. And I always loved the fact that the children enjoyed it. You don't have to make a big fuss over it, you know, but what do they hear generally? The Beatles or some other rock band. That's not real music. I mean, that's fine if that's what you like. That's great. But it's not the only thing that music should be.
Makes sense.
Yeah. And history, of course, do you know how to use the history timelines and things? That's of great importance for the children, I think. Very great importance. But there are some things that are put out there that I don't like, and I don't think they should be doing it. And that is the way that, although I like Sanford Jones very much, and I think he did a great job, the way he was teaching history displeased me very much, because it was politically correct. And that shouldn't be. You know, just the day and the date. Let it alone. You know, don't get into trying to convince the kids that they should change the world. That's not even ethical, in my opinion.
Wow, that's so interesting to hear you say that. I have a lot of these types of thoughts that I haven't formulated fully, but something doesn't seem right, because I'm still of that age where I had some of that they just taught us facts and taught us how to think rather than telling us what to think. But now it's really hard to even express that, let alone have conversations in public about that. That must have been interesting for you to see that over a trajectory of time.
Well, I noticed with, you know, we were taught in Italy, so we had European history, you know, the European strip, because that's where he was. Come back to this country, you do it a different way. You do the strip and everything, different dates, different important occasions, and so forth and so on. And that was fine. There's nothing wrong with that. But it is absolutely wrong to narrow some historic facts down to suit your political taste. That's unethical completely. And Sanford, just when he was looking at making the United States timeline, the Second World War, he puts the Hiroshima bomb. That's not the thing to teach. That's not what you expose a child to. You must expose them, either don't do it, don't teach about the Second World War, which is wrong, but you know, if you're going to do what you want to do, then that, I think it's unethical. Teach the Second World War, teach what happened with Hitler, teach what happened with uh, Tojo. Teach what happened to the people that fell into the uh, hands of these people, you know. And I really got to the point a couple of times in the big meetings we used to have in the summer. I guess they still have them. I haven't been to one in years. But that would come up, and I was always very much against it. No, you're narrowing it down, and you're teaching from your political perspective. That's unethical. You shouldn't do that. And you know, if you want to teach about the Second World War and you don't want to admit other things besides Hiroshima, then for Pete's sake, don't teach anything. But never do it because this is what you believe. You can tell the children, you know, I voted for President X, but it's up to you if you want to vote for President Y. And let them discuss it. Let them,
Sure, that's okay.
let them discuss for them amongst themselves what they believe about this and what they believe. In fact, teenagers I encourage to do that. And I also think that it's a good time for them when they're between 12 and 15, no older than that, but between 12 and 15, to take them to Europe, take them to Asia, take them to South America. You can get good group rates. They're young children. They get half off or whatever. And they also learn that there are other ways of living. There are other ways of, here in this country, you'd never take a train from here to there. Whereas in Europe, you take it all the time. And that's, I think, important for them to learn. I always noticed after the children had come back from a long trip, it had a tremendous effect on them at that age. They were very much at home when they grew up and went to other places and things. And the mothers always, you know, remarked on that, how easy it was for the kids to go someplace. And I mean, you have to be careful that they are taken to a place where it's safe. I wouldn't travel now with them because of the things that are going on in Western Europe. It's not safe. So I wouldn't do it now, but at the time that I was still teaching, you could do it. I took the children from Charleston. Where did we go? We went to Greece. We went to Greece, and while I was in the air, I got a notice. The stewardess said to me, "Make sure you check with me before you get off tomorrow." I said, "Okay." I was thinking, "Gee, that's funny. I wonder what she wants to do. Did somebody do something wrong? Did somebody take somebody else's shoes? What's going on?" So anyway, when we got into Athens and landed, Greece and Turkey had gone to war. And technically they didn't shoot at each other, but they had gone to war. A state of war existed. Therefore, Olympic Airways had been taken over by the government, and we were stuck in Greece.
Oh my.
So
immersion experience.
It was immersion, yeah. And believe me, 29 days in Athens is too many days in Athens.
Wow.
Yeah. But one thing they did, the travel company that had arranged it, naturally the Greek office, they had to provide for us because we were there, and it was, you know, their fault, not ours, that this had happened.
Wow.
So what they did was they put us on every boat that they could get their hands on, because they also were in charge of the cruises around the Aegean Sea, you know.
Wow.
So those boats were going back and forth, and it was cheaper for them to put us on a boat than to keep us in Athens. So we went on all these different boat trips.
That's great.
Yeah, and eventually we got home. Yeah.
Wow, what a story.
It was funny.
Yeah.
It was funny. One of the kids would, for some strange reason, I don't know how it happened, but Athens isn't big. It's a smaller city, and in the town, and I realized one of the kids wasn't there. So a mother who had come to make the trip with us said, "Well, I'll go back and see if she had gone back to the hotel. She knew how to get there." The kid.
Just hanging out in the hotel. How about that? Well, I've got a few more. If you got more in you, got a few more.
Go ahead.
So, do you have any experience with Montessori education being shared in non-typical settings, such as the developing world, or detention centers, or hospitals? Anything like that?
No.
Have you heard of any?
No. I do remember Elizabeth Caspari had gone to Panama, and she was trying to train some teachers there. But of course they couldn't afford the materials from Nienhuis, and they were making, like the beads, they made them out of coffee beans. They made the chains out of coffee beans and things like that. I don't think that Montessori continued in Panama. There was a lot of upheaval, just as there is pretty much all the time in Central America. But as far as I can recall, she was still at it while she was still alive, you know. I don't know exactly when it was that she was doing the work in Panama. I would guess probably the middle 80s. I don't think that it's right to try to squeeze Montessori in as an extra. It's never going to work that way. You either started out giving the children the freedom to choose, which is completely against the traditional teaching. But if you don't do that with them in Montessori, they're never going to progress. You know, they have to choose their own work, and they have to follow it through, and they have to finish with it. Well, that's impossible in the average school. If you stop and think now, let's go back to the 23 kids, you know. And when I was teaching in traditional schools, and I was teaching 3rd grade, and I had, you know, a handful of 20-odd kids here, it was just amazing to me that they were forced into this idea that they all had to do the same thing at the same time, and it had to be done in 45 minutes because that's the bell rang and they went to another class. Well, you don't learn that way. You know, you just skim on top of things. It's astounding how much time is wasted in schools. It really is. It is astounding. And I was very pleased to hear that some of the public schools around here have started using the 3-hour cycle in the morning, that the children stay for 3 hours. That way the teacher can get to every child. And if they have a question or if they have trouble, she has time to help them. Absolutely, I think that that's a step in the right direction. And it doesn't take Montessori training to do it. And a math teacher, for instance, who had 3 hours could really do a lot in 3 hours. But how can you work with 22 children in 45 minutes and get to anybody? And especially the one that is having trouble is going to be very self-conscious about it because he's being exposed to ridicule when he gets bad marks. What does that do to the child's mind?
Well, I'm an example of that. I mean, I'm a living example of that. That was my childhood. I didn't fit in with those 23 children, and I shut down very early. I shut down and closed myself off and told myself that I was stupid, and because I couldn't get it. And then learning disabilities and all these things, and they hadn't, you know, they weren't structured for abnormalities in learning at that time. So we were sort of warehoused.
The thing is, it's not an abnormality.
Exactly.
You know, everybody has some things that they don't do well. Everybody has some things that they do very well. So the abnormality that you're speaking of, that has nothing to do with your life.
Because there's not really a normal.
No, no, there's no norm. And we shouldn't be putting a mark down. Why do we do it that way? Because it's always been done that way, but it's always failed a certain proportion of the children. And it's not the children, it's the system that has failed. A kid doesn't fail. He'll learn what he has to learn. If it comes with difficulty in a certain way, I'm sure you remember this, that when you learn to get around it or do some other way of doing it or retaining it or not retaining it, you found a way to adjust to it. Every child can do that, you know. And I think that it's what it does, what it has always done. It has cheated the person of the learning that he should have or she should have. It has cheated the world of somebody who could contribute very well in another way or in another position, and it has cheated the communities because very, very often they value something that is not valuable. So many of the boys and girls I went to school with as I say, it was a Catholic school, so you didn't have, they didn't take people that they had to take. If you stepped on somebody's toes, they threw you out. But the system itself, I remember feeling for so many of the people that went through school with me, feeling so bad because the marks were read out for everyone, and they were not good marks. Well, that's a deliberate humiliation. What does it teach a child when he's been humiliated? Well, he stops trying. And it's not the child, it's the system that has failed, not the child.
Wow, thank you for sharing that. That's I'm going to listen back to those words. I've got a couple more questions for you. The first one is there's this concept that's resonated with me a lot, and I'm still building my understanding of how vast it is and what it means, and that's this idea of cosmic curriculum in Montessori education.
Cosmic education.
Yeah, and I was wondering if you could give me an idea of what that means to you and your experience with that concept.
It's just, Sanford Jones started that cosmic education, and it's the idea that we can learn so much more, we can, broaden ourselves so much more. We can do all those things, but it doesn't have to be done under cosmic education. And that's just a trap, just a label that they've put on something. But what he meant by it was all the charts should be used so that the children understand them. They should understand, for instance, exactly that children who don't learn this way can learn that way, and that's important. And that education is not useful unless the person comes to love what he's doing and love what she's doing. It takes all the materials. Cosmic education takes a lot of the materials and a lot of time, but it's the glory of Montessori. It's so fulfilling to watch when these kids are 12 or 13 years old, where they can do almost anything that you can think. They're interested in X, and so they're going to sit down. I'm going to do a timeline of this and that and the next thing. And I can remember this same little boy that had the hearing problem with his ears. He came to school. He came from 3 to 6, and he started in at 6 to 9. And he said to me, "I'm going to make a map of every country in the world." And I said, "That's nice." Sure you are. Go right ahead. Well, by God, he did it. He sat down, and for days and days, he used those big maps, traced everything, wrote the names. He did every single country in the world. And I, was very impressed at that, because I really thought a 6-year-old starting a project like that, but he did it. He needed a little help, but that's what the teacher's there for, to help him. And the interest that some of them show that continues on in their lives. My son is a geologist, and I can remember him when he was still in Montessori, making levels of dirt and all these different things that he would be interested in. And in the long run, it was just exactly what he wanted in life.
That's so awesome.
Yeah. Cosmic education is simply the advanced course and taught with all the materials and with children who have, you have to have children who've come through, because they learn very early to finish what they start. It's very hard with a child who comes in later. Almost impossible.
So it's a type of abstract that connects all of the
You show the different things, how can I describe it? You bring the little cards that you're making. Perhaps you're studying, let's say, transportation. Okay, so you start with feet, and then you go on to donkeys, and then you go on to horses, and you go on to wagons and coaches and several horses and so forth. And then you start with the automobile, and you go on from there. And then when you're with the automobile, you have also got this study of energy, because the automobile takes energy, the car, the gasoline. So those things come together, and that's what you have to make sure you have all the details down, and you just point them out, and you hope the child sees it for himself, because if he doesn't, then he hasn't quite got the gist of what he's doing yet.
Mm.
And the idea of music, you know, you can have the musicians here and there in the next place, and then the musical processes and how we at one time had to go to a musical in order to hear it, whereas today we can use a radio or a disc or, you know, whatever.
Sure.
That kind of thing. That's basically cosmic education, so that you see how these things travel all over the world and touch everybody's life. Yeah.
Love it. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I get just a couple last things. One is, so in my life right now, I'm so fortunate that I get to travel around and share this collection of rare musical instruments.
Oh,
And
wow.
I travel and bring a map with me always, and then I bring 20 or 25 examples of different pieces, and I also bring relics and keepsakes, things that are
Yeah.
maybe a piece of nature, some rock from
Yeah,
the pyramids, or you know, something like that. And I was going to ask you if you had any insight or advice for me doing this, how to, in that little bit I've told you about it, how to do it better. What comes up
Well,
for
I think
you as
you're
I share
doing
that?
fine. I don't think that you need anybody to tell you how to do it better. You're doing fine.
Yeah, I'm doing fine.
Yeah,
But when
yeah.
I explain that to you as a teacher and educator, what do you see the value in that for?
Oh, in music?
Yeah, in music and in sharing these things, coming in with a mobile museum.
Oh,
What does that do
it's
for
the
kids?
best thing in the world for them. So what does it do for them?
Yeah.
It satisfies their need to learn.
Mm.
You know, we need to learn.
Yeah.
Our minds are hungry for knowledge.
Mm.
It's not something you can open your mouth and shove it down. You know, your mind is hungry for knowledge, especially in a child. You know, before they can understand what their path is in life and what the great joys are in their lives. And they should be encouraged to follow the path that gives them pleasure. Those things are very important to them. And I think showing them what you're doing is perfect. Absolutely perfect. Well, encourage them to go around and see things and find things. You know, it's one of the things that is so useful in the early years, in the 3-year-olds, 3 and 4-year-olds, is when you can take something that they use, like a fork or a spoon, and it's got tarnish on it, and you help them polish it, and they see this nice shiny spoon. Oh, and they're so pleased with themselves, and then it's useful. You know, that is very satisfying to a child.
Yeah.
You know, he polishes his shoes, or she polishes, you know, a bracelet that she's gotten, or whatever it happens to be, or they set the table nicely. The eye hungers for beauty. Children should have always beautiful things around them. That's why Montessori was very demonstrative when it came to furniture and things like that. You couldn't put junk. You couldn't have something that they had to worry about because it might be broken. Well, who needs that? You got 22 kids in a classroom and you're worried about whether somebody's going to break a plate? Well, then that plate does not belong there. But on the same token, you want the child to understand that if the plate is broken, we can't eat with it anymore, and he was careless or whatever happened, or if it's just an accident.
Yeah.
So they should have beautiful things around them, and they should learn to take care of them. But that's the basis of Montessori. Absolutely. It should satisfy the child, and it usually does. When they see something new and nice, oh, they like, you know, they like new clothes, they like this, they like that. And that is, only the human can appreciate that kind of beauty. That's the great thing in the human mind. And I think the fact that the child is not humiliated with a mark or whatever, and the fact that the child can be encouraged to, if he wants to study horses, fine, there's always a kid who loves horses, you know. Okay, so you want to study horses, let's look at how many cards we can find about horses. Let's look at books on horses, and they'll have to draw and so forth and so on. That is a great thing in their lives. There's nothing wrong with liking horses and being caring, you know, to learn to care for them and so forth. At Alexander, we had horses. The children used to ride.
Wow.
But after a while, we gave it up because the insurance was so high. The children were hurt a couple of times. So it had to stop. But I think, you know, the need for things that are beautiful and the need to start and finish, these are very important in life. Very important. The sense of order is important in life. So, well.
This has been so valuable to me.
Oh,
Thank
good.
you.
I'm glad.
I'm gonna. I got something I wanted to give you. I'll bring it to you. I've been working for some time collecting these musical instruments, and you're the first one to get one of these.
Oh.
Yesterday, I got this order of books in the mail, and this is a picture book that has the collection of instruments that I travel around with to different communities.
Oh, this is beautiful.
So I wanted you to have it.
Well, isn't that nice?
Yeah. So you're interview 1 of 1. So
Great.
season 1, episode 1. So
Oh, this is beautiful.
I will.
Oh, this is beautiful.
Yeah, it's for you. Thanks
Thank
for
you
making-
so much.
You're welcome. Well, you've provoked all these ideas in me now, so I'm going to digest it, and I hope we can all get up for a meal or something sometime
Sure.
and just catch up
Absolutely.
more.
Yeah, this is very nice.
Thanks.
This is beautiful the way this is laid out. I love that.
Yeah, I like to call it a mobile instrument museum so
Uh-huh.
that the children
Uh-huh.
can, you know, I always
Yeah.
had, my great-grandmothers were both there when I was a child, so we had the
Wow.
opportunity to pick up special things, and everything had its place, and, you know, and that's
Yeah.
what I do, you know, I do the same thing. Everything has its place. And,
Yeah, that's a very valuable thing.
that's
Oh,
it.
this is lovely.
Thanks. Yeah, I do like a technology part where it's like
Did you
modern.
do all this layout and everything?
I did, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, each of them has a story, you know, that's one of my favorite things that I've realized is I love telling stories, and this gives me the props to be able to to do that. And my next step is to make captions for all of them and make a longer book, but I wanted to get something out.
Oh, I think it's beautiful.
Thanks.
This is lovely. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
I'm going to give this to Lee.
Beautiful. And I'm
and
gonna
her
let
use this
you.
for the children.
Yeah, great. And that makes me very happy. And
Oh, this is lovely.
thanks.
This is lovely.
Well, thank you so much. Thanks for your
Yeah.
time.
It was a
wrap
pleasure.
up. Thanks, you too.
I enjoyed it.
Me too. That was very
This is-
special.